A very good warm afternoon to all of you. Yes, I'm Kelvin. I'm your moderator for today's session. All right, so I'll start with the first one from this audience. Okay, in terms of innovation, are you planning to build fulfillment centers in heavy traffic countries for faster delivery to end user to significantly reduce the international shipment lead time? I think this question can pass to Ridwan. Perhaps you can take this over, Ridwan. I repeat the question again. Are you planning to build a fulfillment centers in a heavy traffic countries for faster delivery to end user and to significantly reduce international shipments lead time?
Okay, in terms of setting up a fulfillment center, we normally listen to the market demand, also on the need of the customers, right? We have come a lot of inquiries in, for example, setting up of the RDC, and probably we have our own thoughts and views, and that is where we come in and also discuss mutually with the customers and what would be the best location to set up a fulfillment center. Of course, in terms of DHL, we are in terms of fulfillment built to suit into the tailor-made towards individual specific customers. So normally we look into the center of gravity of where is their nearest or the largest strategic market that they want to penetrate, right? Or their existing customers. So and also in terms of resources and other elements that makes it a formidable location for a fulfillment center. And also we look into the network of transportation that is available to serve their markets. So if that is something which is jive to the customer's needs and they find the relevance of it, then by all means that is something that we will also invest to put in terms of the location to be proposed. But traditionally, if you talk about the context of Malaysia, we normally go to where the infrastructure has been well developed and matured. We're talking about major cities of Penang, KL, and JB, right? So in Port of Tanjung Pelepas. So in that way, you can see that even in these three locations, back to your questions in terms of high traffic volume and the concentration of the market base is something that is already there. For example, in terms of consumer related, if the demand or the consumers are constituting within the Klang Valley, so it is make more sense to have the fulfillment to be in Klang Valley. So it also depends on what kind of sectors of these customers are falling into. Yeah. Thank you, Kelvin. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, in terms of we want to build a fulfillment center in any type of location, right? I think that data also play a very important role. Perhaps Mr. Gore, that you can give some input from in terms of innovation center perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a good point brought up. In terms of data, I think where the demand is also one aspect. So depending on demand, depending on how much inventory you have, this kind of affects the way fulfillment center might be set up. So not just one area, right? So we need to consider from a business point of view, the network, the demand, as well as the population, or even what are the various other factors that might affect your decision on a certain fulfillment center. So from an innovation point of view, I think leveraging on the data that we have will actually help us to see where the demands are and help us make a better decision on what kind of locations we would like that to happen. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Gore. Okay, let's move on to the next questions. Yeah, I think this one will refer to, I think Mr. Gore, is your turn again to answer this. How trustworthy is the robot and what is the guarantee for accurate service on picking and delivery?
I think the question here is, well, okay, if you are talking about picking and delivering on a last mile delivery type of thing, I think there's already autonomous technology, right, that does that, and many people are actually experimenting that. But it really depends on the area that you are in. So like urban areas like Singapore, maybe a AGV type of thing might not really work because of all the obstacles that you have. So interestingly, we have also seen, I mean, if you ever chance upon like the Boston Dynamic dog, right, which allows the four-legged dog to deliver your items, that is in the works, and it might be the future, right, that it might happen. But if you talk about a more controlled environment, like a warehouse setting or even a manufacturing setting, I think the technology has already matured. Again, very much depending on the kind of use case that you're looking at. So it must be very use case specific and not very generic. So if you are talking about just picking a repetitive task, I think the accuracy and the technology now is already here, and you can already implement it already, like what you see in the video that I show. But again, very use case specific to give you a very direct answer, right? To compare. So you must really define what kind of use case you are looking at, how you want to implement that. Then we find the proper solution for that, for your kind of use case. Yeah.
All right. Okay. What would be the ideal way in terms of setting up a distribution center to cushion the impact of pandemic and crisis? I think this one will be referred to Mr. Ridwan.
Okay, thanks, Kelvin. To cushion the impact, right? I think the key word here is diversification, right? We have to diversify in terms of sourcings, in terms of supply, as well as your distribution center, yeah? Because it will definitely be a great risk if we are relying only on one single source and probably one dependency on one single location. So putting up a scenario, if that country that the sourcing is done is on a lockdown, you don't have plan B or plan C. So if we have the opportunity to revamp back our supply chain, structure, we should have multiple source of location to provide those materials or the distribution source of that item. And that is one. Number two is, of course, in these challenging times, we should look into automation and digitalization. For example, that if we are dependent on foreign migrant workers, right, and the numbers, the supplies is not forthcoming due to government restriction, it allows us to look into automation, things that can be automated. Then it has to be, be part of the plan. Like in the warehousing context, things that as simple as conveyor belt, putting up a conveyor belt in your warehouse that can reduce the dependency of foreign laborers up to 4 to 5 head count. And, it's not a very high cost of investing in terms of conveyor belt. So simple things which is practical, which is, can address the issue, that should be looked into in terms of setting up and how we run the fulfillment during these challenging times. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ridwan. I think the next question will for Mr. Gore. What are the factors to consider when implementing innovation? What are the factors?
I think one of the things that we have found out is really the pain points. I think deriving from a problem and a pain points is one area that you can think about when you want to implement what kind of innovation and what kind of innovation journey you want to take. And then the various trends and technologies that you think might be relevant to your industry. So for us, we try to segment that, right? We identify it, whether is it 5 years or 10 years, and we really focus on it. We do research and we find what are the relevant technology in the next 5 years or so that we could potentially already scale it within our business. So in terms of implementation, that's one way. And of course, I think with everything, it's always business case and also cost, right? I think one of the things we also watch out for is cost. While we want to see very cool innovation going into operations, the one main thing is always cost, whether it makes business sense. So we want to balance that, right? Whether is it okay to have productivity, but yeah, over time we can budget in that cost and it works fine. So things like that will help us to implement and even bring innovation and digitalization into your environment. So thinking out the box a bit, but yet working with some form of structure will really help you to start off your innovation journey.
Okay. All right. So the next questions, I think this also for Mr. Gore. Maybe you can share some insight from our Asia Pacific Innovation Center. Yeah. Any planning on drone delivery for domestic or even for international shipments?
If I think planning, everybody would like to test domestic delivery of drones and even international, right? But here we always see the restrictions from regulations. That's one. But with that said, I think we are internally talking to various agencies, and in fact, in Australia, we have actually kind of looking into the mining industry. So not so much about domestic delivery and international delivery, more about sector specific, right? So like in Australia, the mining industry is always very remote. And sending parts is always difficult. Sending parts is very expensive, right? Critical parts send is very expensive. So can we leverage on drones? So we are actually planning. We have a team, our colleague who's looking at that, managing that and see what are the possibility. But every time we plan on drone projects, it's always number one, regulation. And number two, I guess, safety, right? So these two is always I would say the roadblock. But with that said, I think different governments or different countries have various regulations that allow for this kind of test, right? So in Singapore, we saw drone delivery to offshore ships. So that is possible. But again, within a confined environment and within a confined regulation space. So if you ask me whether near term we will see multiple drone implementation, I would say no. But in long term, you might see very targeted drone implementation in different sectors. So using drone, to analyze your buildings, right? Analyze your agricultural space. I think that kind of very targeted approach might be allowed, as the different regulations and airspace regulations allow for it. But talking about like domestic and international delivery across building, I think that might be still a bit of a challenge and a lot of pushback in terms of safety, and safety. I think safety is one of them.
Yeah. Safety and also the restriction from the not to say restriction. There's a lot of regulation that we need to follow, especially from the civil, the what we call that, the civil air control that we need to follow. We had covering all the questions, and that's about it. Over to you, William.